Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very great joy once again to have you all here and have a very dear old friend, Professor Habib Khondker, to speak to us today. Habib is a professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at Zayed University, Abu Dhabi, in United Arab Emirates, and he used to be a professor here in Singapore for quite some time. I've learned today from one of your, there are a couple of places empty here also. We have known each other for a long time, not just as fellow Bengalis, but members of the IPSA. And Professor Habib is known to this institute as a theorizer of globalization, of the kind of bonding which makes you global without forgetting what is essential to you, which is what is local. So his work on local citizenship I've used often, and also in the panel that we had on citizenship for the South Asia Diaspora Convention. I'm so glad, Habib, you have decided to come back and talk to us about a theme which is very dear to me and to ISAS. To me, because in 1971, I was a student in Delhi at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and we were receiving freedom fighters from Bangladesh. And afterwards, when we saw that famous statement coming from the United States that what is this Bangladesh? It's a basket case which will be flushed out into the Bay of Bengal. It was annoying. It was something that we resented, but then we also saw Bangladesh appearing to unravel, but it did not. It held together, and more recently, since Bangladesh is so important to ISAS as a key state of South Asia, I went to Bangladesh along with our chairman, and we signed a memorandum of understanding, and I've also lectured in Bangladesh to see how far they have taken their identity and their language, Bangla, into the sciences, into arts, and into everyday life. And what can I say? They put Bengali on the labels of mineral water bottles. That's how proud they are of their identity. And balancing that identity between religion and language is yet another tightrope walk which their governments do. Now, the topic that Professor Habib has chosen lends itself marvelously to this kind of broad canvas, because in one of your many avatars, Habib, last time when I saw you in Adelaide, you were giving a paper of all things on architecture and the architecture of space, how to bring out the essence and project it. It comes naturally to a sociologist, because as all of you know, if you are asked the question, what is sociology? The answer would be, sociology is what sociologists do. Anyway, more about that as you listen to Professor Khondker talking about changing images and imaginaries of Bangladesh. You have the floor.
Thank you, Professor Mitra, for a very generous and perhaps undeserved introduction. But I'm grateful to you not only for inviting me and giving me the platform today. You have been extremely kind to me over the years since we have known each other. And I always admired your work, and we continue to work together probably in the future. Now, the paper that I have before you, it's a paper in progress, but basically I've got the main ideas written down here, and it will be more like a conversation. And why do I call it Images and Imaginaries of Bangladesh? Because images, it's very much like stereotypes, how countries are not imagined, how countries are perceived by others, that's the idea of images. So historically, and I've done some research on famine, historical studies of famine, and I found out that both India and China basically competed for the, not reputation, but notoriety. Who is the country of famines? Historians often refer to China as the land of famines. Some historians refer to India as the land of famines. And over the years, we have seen that how both these countries have shaken off those images and have emerged as emerging superpowers in the global situation. So that's, so far, images are concerned. These are more like stereotypes. These are more like perceptions of a country as held by others. The others are very important. The second issue is imaginary. And in sociology, we often talked about Durkheim and his view of how societies construct collective representations, sometimes collective conscience, consciousness, both words are used in French. That is very similar to imaginary. This is what Cornelius Castoriadis and later on Charles Taylor, the Canadian philosopher, use that phrase, imaginary is a very important idea, that nations have their imaginaries. And I'm not going to bore you with the definitions of what imaginaries are, but basically it's a view of how do they imagine their social existence. And over the years, you may have seen a number of books written on this theme of imaginary, the theme of idea of a nation. And some of the books I mentioned here are, the famous book by Embry, Imagining India, and it's basically a collection of historical articles about Indian self-consciousness and so on. Then Sunil Khilnani's famous book of The Idea of India, which touches on this whole idea of imaginary, although he does not use the word imaginary. He keeps himself to the idea of idea, as done by Greenbaum, his famous book on idea of France. How did France become France? Historians have looked at it very closely, and they pinned it on language. There was a time when French people apparently did not speak French. So there's a historical evolution of formation of the sense of nation, sense of belonging, and sense of connectivity across class and regions, and that's how nations come into being. And more recently, Nandan Nilekhani's book is an amazing book. No one expected him to write on history and politics. He's a kind of IT specialist. And he reflected on what India is. And he brings in ideas and imaginations and imaginaries all in one place. So there is a space for such thinking, that what do we think of Bangladesh, when someone mentions Bangladesh, and how does that impact Bangladeshis in their self-perception, in their self-evaluation of their own country and their own selves? So I think these are some of the issues that I'm going to bring before you. Now, sometimes, we talk about images of the nations, we talk about branding a nation, like the famous Make in India branding by Mr. Modi and his government, that it's not just made in India, but come and make things in India, so that make has a different connotation. And then, of course, Make America Great Again. This is a great slogan, a great idea that comes from Donald Trump. And then some naughty journalists, and journalists are always naughty, pointed out that the Make America Great Again, that cap was manufactured in Bangladesh. So making America great again and making Bangladesh great again are not at cross path. You make yourself great again by making others great again. So that's the subtext of making America great again, as far as I can see it. So this is an image of Dhaka in 1972. Now, the reason I decided to write this paper is because of a very unfortunate event that you all know of. And I'll just read sections from this paper. One late evening on July 1, 2016, in addition to calling my friends in Dhaka frantically, I was also watching CNN for more details of the proceedings of the attack on Holy Artisan, an upmarket restaurant in the posh suburb of Dhaka, a popular hangout for the elite and the expatriates. A gang of terrorists took siege of that restaurant with dozens of unsuspecting patrons. This was the first major hostage crisis in Bangladesh involving religious extremists. As I was glued to the television set, one of the anchors of CNN commented, and I paraphrase, "Bangladesh is such a poor country. I wonder whether it has the means to carry out a rescue mission, whether the government can pay their police salary regularly. Obviously, the otherwise savvy journalist had a blind spot. He knew very little about Bangladesh. In fact, he was a victim of a single story. He obviously had a single story of Bangladesh. He knew that there is a country called Bangladesh in Asia, and all he cared to know was that Bangladesh was poor. Poverty is the only defining feature of Bangladesh. If one played a psychological game of mental association, where you name something and ask people to say the first thing that comes to his or her mind, first thing they can associate it with, in that game, if you mention Bangladesh, the first thing they will associate it with would be poverty or cyclone or some other man-made disaster. I'm not going to blame the CNN newsmen too much. We all have our blind spots. How many of us would readily know the name of the country that has the highest number of women in the parliament? Sweden? Not really. Sweden has 44%, 43.6% to be precise, and its rank is number 6, which is behind Nicaragua. The country with the highest percentage of women in the democratically elected parliament is Rwanda, 61.3%. The second position goes to Bolivia with 53.1%. Yet, when someone mentions Rwanda, it brings back memories of genocide of Tutsi by the Hutu majority in 1994. Most of us are victims of what Chimamanda Adichie calls the danger of single story. On a visit to Australia 2 years ago, many South Asian expatriates, Bangladeshis mainly, asked me, when are the Arab women going to get some education? I could not believe their ignorance of the achievements of Arab women, especially in the Arabian Gulf. When I started teaching at Zayed University in Abu Dhabi, it was a women's university. In the UAE, as in other Gulf countries, women are the majority in the higher education institution. In the UAE, over 70% of university graduates are women. In Kuwait, it's 67%. Even in Saudi Arabia, 57% of the university graduates are women. Some academics now talk about a reverse gender gap in the Arabian Gulf. Now, these are examples of blind spots that we all have. We all are, in some sense, victims of a single story. In early 1980s, when I was a teaching assistant of an old guard professor in the US who was using a book on development class titled Famine 1975, a book that made dire prognosis of famine in India in the 1970s. William and Paul Paddock, the well-meaning authors, warned US as well, to provide assistance to help overcome the famine. Post-independence India saw hardly any famine. India, according to Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, did not suffer from famine since 1947 because of a robust and rancorous democracy. India became a food surplus country in the 1980s, thanks to the much maligned Green Revolution. And the world began to take notice of India in a big way since the economic reforms of the 1990s, initiated by the then Finance Minister Manmohan Singh. Today, Indian leaders are listened to at the highest level, and all the heads of the states of major nations look forward to visit India. In a span of less than 3 decades, India's image has changed from a poverty-stricken, aid-dependent country to a country that enjoys prestige in the community of nations. The same can be said about post-reform China, except that the discussion of their success story can only be introduced with superlatives. China overcame its negative images perpetuated by the colonial rulers as an indolent, opium-smoking, passive nation, thanks to the communist revolution that led to the building of a militarily powerful state that pursued a course of autarkic development and was able to feed its people, with the exception of a mega famine in the early 1960s caused mainly by the authoritarian political system that bred a culture of opacity. Now that we are aware of the danger of single story, let's return to Bangladesh, and more particularly, the story that I'm going to talk about, the changing images of Bangladesh. Now, here I have a few other examples of how the images of countries vary from nation to nation. And there was an opinion poll conducted, how China is perceived across the world, And surprisingly, in South Asia, especially in Pakistan and Bangladesh, I didn't get the figures on India, probably it's not very high. These are two of the highest numbers where China is regarded very, very favorably. And that's why China is now promoting a great deal of soft power diplomacy in the Middle East to bring more countries to appreciate China. Now we look at Bangladesh in the last 25 years. Okay? Now, we all know the story that when the War of Independence was going, in the last phase of the War of Independence back in December 1971, there was at a meeting at the Situation Room in the White House where one U.S. Undersecretary Johnson, Alexis Johnson, he predicted, this was a prediction, he predicted that if Bangladesh becomes independent, it will be an international basket case, to which, at that time, Kissinger was also at the meeting, and he said, it won't be our basket case. Later on, this quote, this unfortunate quote was attributed to Kissinger, but it actually goes back to Alexis Johnson. Now, whatever the source of that unfortunate quote was, it became kind of a birthmark of Bangladesh. Bangladesh could not shake off that image of an international basket case. But if you look at Bangladesh today, 1990, 2015, if we look at these 2 time points, simply look at fertility rate. Fertility rate was 4.5%. Now it's 2.1%, and those in demography know that's the replacement age. Population density, Bangladesh has one of the highest densities in the world. You look at the per capita income, life expectancy at birth, which is often used as an important indicator. It has moved from 58 to 72. If I was living in 1990, and in 2015, 25 years made a lot of difference. Completion of primary education, 46 to 98. That's a remarkable achievement. Secondary enrollments in secondary school from 20 to 64. And then at the same time, we look at remittances from the Bangladeshi workers working overseas. There has been significant jump from less than $1 billion in 1990 to over 15 billion today. Okay? And yet, it took a long time for Bangladesh to get rid of these images of a basket case. Now, I look at Bangladesh history, and I call it a gendered political history of Bangladesh. Rather than looking at whether Awami League ruled or whether Bangladesh Nationalist Party ruled or Jamaat Islami ruled, I look at Bangladesh was ruled for the first few years by men and the last 25 years by women. Basically, I try to simplify it. And most of these remarkable achievements have been achieved in the last 25 years. So that tells us something about gendered leadership, whether it is life expectancy, female literacy. Bangladesh was one of the few countries that achieved a number of Millennium Development Goals ahead of its time. And some of those goals were related to female literacy, decline in maternal mortality, and so on. And that coincides with rule by women in Bangladesh. Women's empowerment, Bangladesh has a very bright position. Now, we started with police, whether Bangladesh police gets their salary according to our friend from CNN, actually Bangladesh police contingent is the second highest police contingent in the UN peacekeeping force. It was number one for a long time. In overall military contribution, Bangladesh is number 4, but it was at one point number 1. Bangladesh fall, and these are very remarkable achievements. That these are soldiers, these are police officers. You can see some of them in blue helmet in peacekeeping forces. They have built a reputation around them. One of the units, one of the UN peacekeeping units, is headed by a Bangladeshi police officer, a female police officer, I might add. Okay. And then over the past few years, in addition to, and I'm not going to dwell on that because these are the stories that are well known. One is the story of Grameen Bank by Professor Muhammad Yunus, and the other is the story of BRAC. Bangladesh, it's called BRAC. There was an explanation of that abbreviation that is lost now, of Sir Abed. And he has been identified by Fortune magazine as one of the top 50 leaders of the world. And it's an amazing achievement from a very small NGO to a major, and perhaps the largest NGO in the world is BRAC. Okay? And it has programs in Afghanistan, it has programs in a number of other countries on informal education, on healthcare, and on microfinance. BRAC is one of the pioneers in microfinance. So I'm not going to dwell too much on the developments, and I look at the development as a public-private partnership. And the private sector is comprised of business. So we have garment industry, which has emerged as the second largest garment industry in the world next to China, with an export of $27 billion or in that neighborhood per year. And then we have, and that garment industry is now moving on from textile garments to ICT, and I'm very pleased to see one of my friends is here. He himself has made the transition from the garments and textile to IT, and he's a leading pioneer in IT business in Bangladesh and a partner of Microsoft in Bangladesh. So I welcome you here, sir. So these are some of the ground realities in Bangladesh, but I'm taking you to the overseas. What are the contributions of Bangladeshis in the rebuilding of its image and the imaginaries? And I look at overseas Bangladeshis. And one of the prominent Bangladeshis that I can think of, again, you mentioned architecture, and I look at all the high-rises, all the skyscrapers in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and behind every skyscraper, there is Dr. Fazlur Rahman. He was the first structural engineer, and I emphasize first structural engineer who designed a tall building, and at one point that was the tallest structure in the world, Sears Tower in Chicago. He designed that, and he said, this building will swing with the air. If there's a storm, it won't affect it. And he designed, he came up with a very innovative design. And I'm told that all architects, all structural engineers follow that design. So in every tall building behind that, there is Dr. Fazlur Rahman. And then recently, this is a gentleman, young man, Salman Khan, who was given this distinction of Padma Shri last year by the Indian president, because his mother, who is my cousin, and she claims that she's from India. We are from India. Historically, we migrated to Bangladesh. But this young man's father is from Barishal, which is a rural town in Bangladesh. He was a medical practitioner in Philadelphia. This young man has made a significant contribution in promoting online education worldwide. Some of the African countries are following his curriculum, and they're saving money on formal schooling. And then I move on to this young woman, Wasifa Nazreen. She is a mountain climber. Not only she has scaled Mount Everest, she made it a point to climb all the tall mountains all over the world, and she has done it. Now, one of her classmates, one of her class friends, is this young girl. Her name is Tulip Siddiqui, and she is a member of parliament, one of the 3 women, Bangladeshi descent women parliamentarians in England. And when she was asked in an interview that, who inspired you to go for politics? Why did you run for an elected office? And she said, you know who inspired me? Sheikh Hasina. And they said, what's the connection? She said, she is my aunt. So what I'm saying, that the image that Bangladesh is rebuilding with years and decades of negativity around the world is being built not just by the Bangladeshis in Bangladesh, but by the Bangladeshis in the diaspora. And we talked about diaspora in your conference most recently. So this is Dhaka today. So the density of the population is best reflected in these images. And that has, of course, created, that has brought in its heel one of the most entangled traffic system that you would ever see, But that's the price you pay for rapid economic growth. And it's very difficult to catch up with this huge population that is coming into the city with the infrastructures and the planning. Now, I don't want to go through the rest of the paper. I would leave it here with this image of Dhaka and Bangladesh, and simply to come back to this whole issue of how images contribute to the imaginary. And I would predict that right now in 2017, Bangladesh stands at a crossroad, that now Bangladeshis completely reject those images of basket case. The new generation of Bangladeshis, and a large number of them are in diaspora, they're contributing to the IT sector in US. You go into Google, you go into Yahoo, you have Bangladeshi software engineers working hand in hand with their counterparts from India and from other countries. You have young Bangladeshis in academia in North America. Every single university will find 1 or 2 top-notch Bangladeshi academics in their 30s. So this is to me, that really shows a new sign, a new signal of reversing that basket case image. And here I conclude by simply saying that, we have seen that image of the young woman who has scaled Mount Everest. And I'm sure many more Bangladeshis are poised to climb new heights to make Bangladesh a country that the world will treat with respect and dignity rather than pity. And this new chapter has begun. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a couple of memorable quotes that I'll take away from this conversation. One is the danger of a single story, and the other is the Rwanda paradox. I still don't believe Rwanda could have 61% elected women members, but then that shows how perception of the other is ultimately self-perception. And as a sociologist, you'll have to help me understand, how do we ever have a conversation? How is ever a common language possible? Why don't we get trapped into the never-ending nexus of I think, he thinks, I think, he thinks, I think, he thinks? How is ever a dialogue possible? But those are theoretical issues, and we should work on those. But the thing which is much more important to Singapore is, why do we talk about Bangladesh at all in Singapore? That Bangladesh is connected in a number of ways. There are the remittances, and there is also the fear, the danger of contagion of terrorism by association, of sleeper cells, and so on. And not only that, Bangladesh is a coveted partnership for Singapore, of all places, in the Indian Ocean Rim Association, of which Singapore is a founding member, and Bangladesh, I think, is the chairperson, and Singapore, by association, wants to go up, which is how we received in Singapore the IORA High Command. The other thing that interests Singapore very much in Bangladesh is the role that Bangladesh is playing, not only in the various areas where you mentioned, but also in diplomacy, in terms of straddling India and China. And at the other hand, helping India also to balance China. And Singapore lives off balancing. The little green dot in the green sea needs this balancing. So how does Bangladesh do the balancing, not only internationally or in South Asia, but internally? How does Bangladesh balance the rising tide of Islamic terrorism and at the same time an obstinate resilience of secularism? These are the various issues that would be of interest to ISAS, because the mandate of ISAS is to connect Singapore to stakeholders in South Asia and stakeholders in South Asia to Singapore. These are issues that, core issues that interest us, but for the very reason that you mentioned in the beginning of your lecture, one can't quite see it. When you look at, it's a classic question of India's epistemology. What is it? Is it a snake or is it a rope? Is it the shape of both? What it is, you cannot tell until you get close to it. And of course, if you're fearful that it's a snake, you rather not get close to it. These are the reasons why a conversation like this is so very important to this audience. You have been very mindful of the time, so we have a lot of time remaining. I would now like us to engage Professor Habib in a general conversation. I'll take questions. And I'll first recognize Professor Sumit Ganguly, our distinguished visiting professor from the United States, and your chance will come next. So I'll take, you go ahead, ask the first question, then I'll turn to Anish.
I think that was an absolutely fascinating talk. I just have one comment and one question which actually follows up on something Subrata hinted at. The first is, as a sociologist, you'll appreciate this and perhaps might even incorporate it into your paper. There was a book written approximately in the mid-1960s by Harold Isaacs, an American anthropologist, and it's called Scratches on Our Minds, American Images of China and India. And the entire book was based upon cartoons and popular images of India and China. And Isaacs demonstrated how little Americans actually knew and how much these popular cartoons and popular culture shaped American images. Today, of course, when giving a lecture, I often allude to the book and say China and India are no longer scratches on our minds, they're more like gashes on our minds. So that's just something as a kind of a little framing device you might want to bear in mind. The question that I have is something that Subrata hinted at, but I want to push it a little bit further. Bangladesh has a kind of and I don't say this in any way to be pejorative or hostile, far from it. As a fellow Bengali, I couldn't possibly bring myself to do that. But there is a fundamental tension in terms of identity. On certain days of the week, it is an identity based upon language, based upon literature, and a certain cultural heritage. On a certain other days, it is the tug of Islam. And so how does one reconcile these two identities? And especially at a time when, quite frankly, Islam is in a state of turmoil globally. And unfortunately, particularly in my adopted country, led by a man of limited intelligence, identified with the worst elements imaginable. And that's why this whole issue of Bangladesh's identity is a non-trivial matter.
Thank you very much. Would you like to take this question?
Questions?
Yeah. Would you like to take some more questions?
Some more
Okay.
questions. Yes, please.
All right. I've got two more questions already. Dr. Deepinder Singh and then Anish. Deepinder?
Thank you, Mr. Khondker. I come from a very different background, so I'm just going to qualify myself. Your theme is changing images and imaginaries and constructions, and I was listening to you earlier, I couldn't help but thinking of Zayed and Orientalism and how there were similar images and constructions taking place of another part of the world. And the extent to which that shaped Bangladesh in its incipient years and subsequently. There's another narrative that you alluded to briefly, and that is nothing short of extraordinary progress that Bangladesh has made against all norms of history, and that is in gender, in the health, in the role of the female literacy, in bringing down birth rates, and generating healthy children, and so on and so forth. And that narrative seems to get submerged somehow. I'm not quite sure. My question is, in contrast to, there's a certain power structure at play in constructing these images and these notions of a nation or nation state. And that very clearly reflects a power structure. However, in more contemporary times, I was wondering how that process, is there possibility of a democratization or more open end with online media and other avenues and the multiplicity of voices, that are emerging? Can that alter? Are the power structures being whittled away at all, or do you feel they're being reinforced? I think of specific countries which have been success, and the image has been communicated as well. And one country that comes to mind very readily is Costa Rica. It's made very tangible progress, but at the same time, there's some of the negatives that have also been swept under in this broader, more positive narrative that's emerged. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take a third question from Anish Mishra.
Okay, my name is Anish Mishra. All right, I have actually two questions. Firstly, excellent presentation on changing images. So as we see, from what was a basket case to what Bangladesh is, I want to know, what's the future for Bangladesh? Like we know in the Awami League's manifesto, there's this thing called Vision 2021, where they expect that by 2021, Bangladesh will actually become a middle-income country. And if we look at what Bangladesh now, definitely significant progress since what it was, but in 3.5 years, I don't think there's enough time to reach a middle income status. So I'd like your opinion on this as well, on Vision 2021. Now, my second question is on the basis of the nationhood of Bangladesh. If you actually, go back to history, actually, Bangladesh is a nation whereby the sovereignty of Bangladesh is actually based on still the two-nation theory, although it's split from Pakistan. Let's go back to the Lahore Resolution of 1940, where it says independent Muslim states, and one of the Muslim states was Bangalistan. And if you look at whatever Jinnah actually wanted for Pakistan, Bangladesh has achieved it. I've made this point that actually, if you look at Pakistan, is no longer the Pakistan of Jinnah, but Bangladesh has achieved whatever Pakistan wanted. That's why if Jinnah actually woke up from his grave, he'll be very proud of Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is actually, it's a secular country. It's, very accordance to two-nation theory, whereby the Muslims are in a majority, and then, we split from the Hindu Bengal. And this actually leads to a lot of issues for Bangladesh, because by this virtue of your sovereignty, you need to have some kind of antagonisms with India. And that's why I also would like to know, how do you actually balance the basis of nationhood? Are you a secular Bengali nation state, or what are you then? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like you now to engage these questions.
These are all excellent questions and comments for which I'm very grateful to you. I start with Professor Ganguly. That's an excellent help from you. I'm going to look at that book because I'm not aware of that book. But one book that I am aware of, and I was thinking of that book, I probably have a copy of that book somewhere, is a book titled, What Do Koreans Think of the Japanese? This is the title of the book. And in the first chapter, you would learn that Koreans think that the Japanese are lazy. Why Japanese are lazy? They work only 6 days a week. And I thought that was really interesting. So, you look at images from very specific countries, from the vantage of a country, that gives you one image, and the overall, the so-called global image. Now, for Bangladesh, this basket case image became global, and that kind of transcends Edward Said's Orientalism. And I have to get patent on this because I invented a term some years back called lateral Orientalism. By lateral Orientalism, I meant that I went to South Africa from Abu Dhabi at a conference, and they gave me a badge, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia. And I said, that's lateral Orientalism. When I go to America, they don't make that mistake. So we can come back and talk about it. But coming back to this question of identity, which sort of straddles question 1, question 2, and question 3, the identity question, and again, I hate to be self-referential, but I did write a paper called The Pendular Theory of Nationalism. It's a working paper with ARI, Asia Research Institute, and there I argued that depending on who the government in power is, you have a different kind of self-representation, different identity in Bangladesh. And for very practical reasons. So when BNP comes into power, usually it is aligned with Jamaat-e-Islami, so they play the Islamic card, that we are Muslims first, Bengalis second. When Awami League comes, it says we are at different junctures of Awami League. Initially it was we are Bengalis first and Muslims later, but increasingly with Sheikh Hasina, I think she's breaking that binary and she's saying we are both Bengalis and Muslims. So she's playing to the demands of the religious right sometimes and playing this game very, very skillfully. And this is a kind of balancing game. She is more like a juggler, who can play with multiple balls. I often look at her and I admire that skill, that if I were in her position, I would take either or position. But she loves to play with multiple balls and juggles these balls. So one is with the religious right, she plays with them, and then she plays with the secularists. But she does not want to align herself with the ultra-secularists. So she does not want to align herself with, let's say, Taslima Nasreen. So she would rather give her a safe passage out of Bangladesh rather than defend her in Bangladesh. So that's what she likes to do. Internationally, she wants to do the same thing. She wants to play with both China and India at the same time. She would always define India as our historical friend and China as our strategic partner, as revealed in the presentation by Mr. Chowdhury recently. And that's what she loves to do. She does not want to antagonize Russia. She's a good friend of Putin, but she also wants to admire America. Now, I don't know, how far she can go with that. And as you know, that Bangladesh has now become a lower middle income country, according to World Bank's classification. Now, whether they can move into the next lap, I don't know. But just by looking at the trends look good. That much I can tell you. But then the success of Bangladesh, to a large extent, depends on what goes on globally in the Middle East, whether Bangladesh can keep on receiving the remittance money from the Middle East, whether it remains a peaceful region or war erupts into Middle East, we don't know. But when garment industry was supposed to be in crisis because of the lack of GST privilege and so on, people thought we are going to lose that, but it has bounced back. No, it's not going to lose. Under new circumstances, it changed its strategies and so on, and it has come back. So I think this is something that I find very interesting. I had a friend from Pittsburgh many years ago. We went to graduate school together, and he got a job with the State Department in US, an American young man. And he was placed in USAID. So he was based in Dhaka. So when I visited Bangladesh, I met Mike. I said, Mike, what is your impression of Bangladesh? Just in one word. And this was in the late 80s, late 1980s. And Mike thought about it and he said, you know what? What impresses me most about Bangladesh is resilience. Because Bangladesh is a land of cyclones, floods, you name it, except I think Philippines beats us because Philippines has earthquakes. We don't have that yet in a major scale. But we get everything that they get in a larger proportion. And Mike says, every time there's a cyclone, I say, this is it. Bangladesh is going to collapse, you know. People just stand up on their feet, shake off the dust, and they're back in the game again. So he was impressed by the resilience of Bangladeshis. And I think Bangladesh continues to be a resilient nation. We see that in cricket, we see that in all spheres, in academia, the schools are collapsing, universities are falling apart. Now we have 100 over private universities in Bangladesh. Every parent wants their kids to go to university. You know, suddenly it's back in the game. Everyone in Bangladesh wants to go to overseas. Some of them want to stay there, live in North America. But many of them, they say, enough of North America, I want to go back and do something in Bangladesh. So I keep meeting, you know, young Bangladeshis returning from different parts of the world and trying to do something in Bangladesh. This was a trend I saw in India in the late 80s. We had a friend who was a doctor. He just showed up in the Indian embassy, American embassy in India, returning his green card, and they thought she was crazy. And she said, no, I'm not crazy. I love my country, you know. And we see the similar scenarios, and one of the scenarios is right here. You know, he returned his green card and said, no, I'm back in Bangladesh, and I want to run this software business from Bangladesh. So these are the new things that make me very optimistic. But of course, you know, it's very difficult, you know, for a nation to shake off that image. And Bangladesh has shown skills and savviness in many aspects. But again, the challenges are huge. And one of the challenges is Islamist radicalism in Bangladesh. And again, this is part of globalization. Many Bangladeshis went to work in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia. Many of them actually joined, as you know, as a leading scholar on the subject. Professor Ganguly knows more than I do, that they joined radical movements under the sponsor of ISIS, Al-Qaeda. You know, you have Bangladeshis found to be fighting alongside fighters from all over the world. So it became a kind of cosmopolitan, in a negative sense, movement. So those are the challenges that the government has to meet. And again, there's an international environment. So the moment the government takes a hardline attitude vis-a-vis the Islamic radicals, Human Rights, Asia Watch, Human Rights Watch, you know, they'll just come forth and say, this government is becoming a dictatorship, and what is this? You know, people are not getting their rights respected, you know, they're denied of their fundamental rights. So this is a catch-22, you know, that you can't be a soft state and play the democratic norms to the hilt and deal with these radicals, but when you want to be hard state, you know, you get the flack from the international community. But so far, I think it's on the right track. And so far, the Bangladesh security forces have shown a great deal of skill in foiling, you know, very many initiatives and plans of the radical groups in Bangladesh. So far, since last July, last 1 year, we didn't have any major attack in Bangladesh by the Islamic radicals or other radicals. Did I answer all the questions? Did I leave anything out? So what is the basis of nationhood? I agree with you. I mean, Jinnah would be very proud, because Jinnah is often misunderstood. Jinnah had very little to do with Islam. And that's why, as you remember, that Jamaat-e-Islami did not support Pakistan. They said, what Pakistan? And not under Jinnah, you know. Jinnah was not known for his belief in religion, you know. I mean, he was practically, what do I call it? Not atheist, more like agnostic. But he became a leader by default, you know. So yeah, if 1940 resolution, where it envisaged there would be 3 states, but I would suggest that the
1940 resolution, not 3 states, just independent Muslim states.
states, yeah, that there would be one Bangladesh and Pakistan, 2 separate entities.
Not even that. Lahore resolution designates independent Muslim states. So I have to draw many states. One of those, right? Osmanistan, Distan, Afghanistan, but only Pakistan was created.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Lahore resolution, 1940.
But earlier there was a discussion that there would be 2 separate entities, one Bangladesh and one Pakistan. But I don't think they called it Bangladesh at that time.
It was called Pakistan.
Yeah. He also, yeah, from some Bangladeshi leaders like Fazlul Haq proposed that there should be a separate entity. But the point is, the experience with Pakistan was quite useful. So my generation of Bangladeshis knew that what does it mean to live under a so-called Islamic state? Because at one point, Pakistan declared itself as an Islamic Republic, then it went back and called itself just a Republic of Pakistan. And Pakistan government always played with Islam. So people could see through the bluff. That look, you use religion, but you don't follow religion at all. There was a famous story written by someone who knew President Ayub very closely. And after Ayub's martial law in 1958, he wrote this story later on in a newspaper that a cameraman was trying to take a picture of General Ayub sitting in a club with his friends. And he was coming very close to take the snap, and then he was moving back. And Ayub got very fed up. He said, "What's going on? Does he want to take my photo or not?" And then someone whispered into him, "Islamic Republic of Pakistan," because he had a glass of scotch in one hand, a cigar on the other hand. And the cameraman was looking for an opportunity where neither he's drinking nor he's smoking, and he couldn't get the chance. So this was, the pretense of Islamic State and so on. Now, Bangladeshi leaders like Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and his associates knew this very well, that you can play the game of religion, but deep down, we have to fight for our independent cultural, nationalist position, which is based on secularism. And this is not the secularism imported from, the post-Enlightenment European philosophy. This is some kind of, built-in garden variety secularism, which goes back to Sufism. So that's the kind of secularism they were playing with, that it's a secularism based on tolerance. No one cared who is Hindu, who is Muslim, as some of the poets of Nazrul Islam, who became the national poet of Bangladesh. That who cares whether he is Muslim or Hindu? That was the idea of secularism in Bangladesh. And there was a great deal of misunderstanding. And as you know, that when the military took over in 75 onward, they played the same game that Ziaul Haq played in Pakistan, that you bring religion into the front. So religion gives you a separate identity from the previous government, and you take a lot of mileage because many of these people are deep down, God-fearing, and you play the game of religion, you can attract them. And that's the same politics we had in Pakistan under Ziaul Haq and Bangladesh under Ziaur Rahman, and it continued in BNP. They thought this is very, very useful strategy, that you use religion as a shield to protect you and separate you from the so-called non-believers. So in the elections, some of the campaigns posters were that you have a choice. Either you vote for Awami League or you vote for Allah. Now, who wants to antagonize Allah, So I think that play of religion is now being very clear to the young Bangladeshis. So I don't think they will fall for it in the future. Did I cover all this? Yeah.
We will take some more questions. Okay.
Yes,
If it's a comment, then I'll let in the comment, because I'm getting Dr. Palit to come in. So, Amithendu.
Habib, I wanted to have your response, a more detailed response to one of the points that you discussed, and this is the question of remittances. It's quite natural that remittances have been very important for the Bangladesh economy, but in some respect, probably remittances are relatively more important for Bangladesh than a few other countries in a similar group, because they're almost a tenth of the Bangladesh GDP, and this number has been rising very fast over the last 10 to 12 years. Now, what I wanted to check with you is that we are aware of the fact that there's been a lot of migration from Bangladesh to Gulf. You alluded to the problems that exist there. But I want to come back to the quality of remittances and emphasize the fact that remittances have been very stable inflows for Bangladesh, much as they have been for quite a few other countries in South Asia, including India. And what this has done is that this has probably given a very strong degree of cushion to these countries, so much so that they are comfortable about the fact that they are not going to encounter any sudden problems in their external sector. They are not going to face a run on their money, and they have enough to cover the deficits that they run in their trade account. Now, what happens in Gulf is, of course, beyond our control, but I'm trying to look at the overall changes in the global labor market and the fact that most of it is becoming inward looking. So it's now becoming increasingly difficult to move people to jobs, as has been the case with Bangladesh, as has also been largely the case with India in a number of other segments. It's been the case with Bhutan, it's been the case with Pakistan. Now, given this, and if you look at the medium term, do you sense this is going to be a serious challenge for Bangladesh to encounter, or do you expect that over the last 15 to 20 years that you said that the Bangladesh economy has gone through several major institutional improvements, you feel that the Bangladesh economy is ready to handle this change?
Thanks very much. I'll take some more questions in this round. I had a couple of questions from here, then I'll turn over to you. Yeah. Can you introduce yourself and make your comment, then we'll move on.
I'm Masoom from Bangladesh. I'm a lawyer. I'm a barrister there. So I just came for a conference here, so turn up here. One thing is like the way it's going to be middle income countries, like GDP, it was like 6.6, but now I think it's 7.2, and it's going expected at the end of year it's going to be 7.4, something more than that. Another thing, as you mentioned about the universities, we have around more than 100, because I also used to teach Northsouth University in Bangladesh. But we have found that there are many universities, and the people, the students are very quality students we're getting now. And these students, we used to export outside before is the labor, very low segment. But now the students going overseas, and they're the skilled ones, engineer, doctors, accountant, lawyers, and you will find everywhere. In European countries, you will find the Australia, America, Middle East, everywhere. Another thing, it's like a women. All women is engaged in, you will find that every villages, they're contributing in a minor way, but they, she's taking bit loan from NGOs, some very low scale amount, but she's making some tools to sell it, and she's earning a good amount of money, and she's participating in the economy, and that is huge. Another thing about the religious things, like the secularism, I don't think any other constitution you would find in the world, whereas the majority of population, like 80 above, are Muslim, whereas in our preface of the constitution you would find first it's written Hindu, Muslim, then others. But you would find any other constitutions which has given the priority, first the other religion compared to the one you have. Even in Sydney, just last week I was there, and some Bengali, the Muslim people was telling me that some mosque gets closed by 9 to 5 after 5 o'clock. But in Bangladesh, you'll not find any barriers to practice any religion. Sometimes some incidents takes place which is very minor, but it's highlighted a lot. Another thing, as I also lawyer of a Bangladesh Security Exchange Commission and the Power Development Board, like the ways the energy sector developing, you won't find nowadays in city, like even for 1 minute electricity stop. I mean, it's always electricity you have. And the infrastructure, the visualize, we have the what called the flyover. It's a enormous transformations taking place. And other demographical, the young generations, we have the age ranges, the young, it's a huge compared to the other, if you consider India or if you consider China, compared to that, the Bangladesh has the more young generations than the aged ones. So the education, like the way the economy being supported by the remittance, I believe that we are exporting more educated and efficient people abroad than before. Before it was just we were exported only the labor and the very low skill. Another thing, the banks, we have, I mean, developed country, you would find how many banks are there. In our country, it's like around 70 banks, the private banks. I mean, there is a business, otherwise that banks wouldn't be developed, the financial institutions. Again, the IT sector taken up, I think billions of now, remittance is, when a person from a village, just an education like a high school education, and he can earn around like 50,000 taka is like around $500 by sitting at home. So that's giving the skilled the labor and the efficient people, and the remittance will come gradually, and that won't be affected by that, what I think.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. As I was listening to your comments, I was wondering if you had anticipated my question, which I'm not going to ask, as to where and how the basket case made its breakthrough, and is it a sustainable breakthrough, or is it a temporary breakthrough through things like exogenous remittances? Yeah. I think I see the beginning of an answer in you, but you're not the speaker today, so I'll not probe you any further. Instead, I'll take a question from the far end. Okay, since you have the microphone, he has the power. So okay, go on.
All right. So I just have
introduce yourself,
one or
please,
two comments. My name is Farhad Ahmed. I'm the managing director of Amra Companies in Bangladesh. Amra operates in a number of business disciplines, starting out in textiles and apparels, and today the focus is in IT and ICT. As mentioned by Dr. Habib, we are partners for a number of world-class companies in IT, Microsoft being one of them, Oracle, Cisco, Juniper, and we've been partnering with them for more than 20 years. We also partner with a few Indian companies. One is Infosys. We've been Infosys partners for 17 years, and their a software solution called Finacle, which is a banking solution, one of the world's best. And I'm proud to say that Bangladesh was responsible for developing a lot of the new innovation in Finacle software today. And this you can talk to Mr. Nelkani himself. I think at the outset, I would just like to say one comment, that little knowledge can be worse than no knowledge. To make comments about based on little knowledge is not fair. I think if you really want to comment and to understand a country and its potential, please go dig deeper. First of all, on the religious side, I think terrorism is something that has taken the world by storm. Every single country is being affected today. How is a country managing this is what's more important today, not putting a blame or highlighting or putting a red sticker on this is a terror-prone country, because terrorism is everywhere. What Bangladesh is doing, and I can tell you very strongly, because we, through public-private partnership, are very much involved in eradicating terrorism, is that we are taking technology by the horns and using technology today, which is a beautiful tool in preventing and eradicating terrorism or terrorist activities. I'll give you one simple example. This smartphone is now designed and developed in Bangladesh. And we know that the world has become such that a smartphone is no longer a luxury item. It's becoming a part and parcel of every single human being. I was joking the other day at a dinner here with one of the ministers here in Singapore. My wife was also there. And I said, "Sir, what is the first thing you touch before you go to sleep? And what is the first thing you touch when you wake up in the morning?" And he looked at me for then he looked at his phone and he said, "You know what?" I said, "I'm guessing it's what the same that I'm doing and most of us are doing." This has become an integral part of our life. Now, this has its plus points and this has its positives and this has its negatives. The positives are, it's a wonderful way of communicating, it's a wonderful way of sharing knowledge, it's a wonderful way of that we can utilize in expediting our careers or our work. But at the same time, for security forces, this can be a wonderful tool for tracking, to know exactly where I am, who I'm talking to, who I'm sending messages to, what emails I'm downloading, which websites I'm visiting. Through GPS, it can actually track exactly where I'm going. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that tools like this in technology can actually help governments in understanding people. Look at countries like Bangladesh. Why is it that developing countries tend to be targets for terrorism? It's because people use poverty, or people use, I think, lack of education as soft spots to actually try to attract terrorism. You'll find that a lot of these so-called terrorist groups are actually targeting groups like that. They're targeting the poor, they're targeting the uneducated, they're targeting the people who are jobless today, and showing them that, hey, come and join us, there's a different life and a different thing ahead. So with the use of technology, the Bangladesh government is actually digging deeper. Prevention is better than cure. So there's one way is of course, you have to tackle any terrorist activities, like Dr. Habib said, and that the government is doing. We haven't had any major incidents since last year, but a cure is not necessarily the solution. We have to dig deep into prevention. So we are digging deep into the roots of where this kind of anarchy or this kind of analogy can be misconstrued, and youngsters can be mistreated or, I think, misguided into believing in certain secular type of activities. So definitely Bangladesh is very well aware, I can tell you, and we are, both the public and the private sector are working hand in hand on this prevention. And I can tell you this much, that this is being admired by a number of countries also, because who have similar issues, they're also being admired. The other thing I want to touch on, the 2021 vision that, sir, you mentioned a little while ago, and about moving from that lower middle income group where we are to the upper middle income group, as Dr. Habib quoted. These quotes are not coming from Bangladesh. These are from the World Bank, from the ADB, and so on. Now, it's a question of whether we as Bangladeshis can live up to that expectation or achieve that, that status is a different question altogether. But at the same time, as my friend here from Bangladesh, my lawyer friend here mentioned, that Bangladesh is not only dependent on the foreign remittances or the ready-made garment export. In ICT and ICT services and software, we are making tremendous headway. You'll be shocked if I tell you today how many apps, Android apps, or whoever is using Android, or if you're using iPhone, how many apps are actually today marketing that are actually created in Bangladesh. The percentage is 23% of these mobile apps are made in Bangladesh, and they get tick mark right from the start. The sad reality is that majority of these developers are actually selling this software to a third party, through a third party, and the label is going to this company in either the US or in Switzerland or somewhere else. But a lot of this development work is being done in Bangladesh. How many of you knew that one of the co-founders of Facebook is a Bangladeshi? Anybody in the room? Okay. He's a student at Harvard. He chose to go back to school, So he left and he sold his stake in Facebook for $650 million and went back to school at MIT. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say, as a proud Bangladeshi today, I can tell you that Bangladesh has continuously defied the laws of economics. And whether, how the rest of the world looks at it is different, but we are making waves, we are making it happen. Despite whatever labels are put on us, bottomless basket or whatever basket, the sad reality or the good reality for us is that we are making waves and we are going forward. Thank you, sir.
Thanks very much. I'll take one more, and then Habib, I'll give you the floor. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Farooq Hussain. I work for Bangladesh High Commission in Singapore. In fact, let me begin by thanking Professor Habib for his excellent presentation. I fully echo with the sentiments just expressed by my fellow compatriot. My question is very specific. As the previous speaker mentioned, there is a lot of misperception about Bangladesh, underpinned by ignorance and lack of information. Now the question is, as someone, since I work for Bangladesh government, my question to you, how do we break this negativity? The question is, what can Bangladesh do to reverse the trend? Now, the misperception is, we talk about development. You mentioned one single indicator of development: economic performance, women empowerment, food security, access to sanitation, climate change, resilience. You take one particular indicator. In every sector, Bangladesh has been doing excellent. The economy for the last 8 years has sustained a growth rate of 6.5%. That's marvelous in the context of a third world country. How many people know that Bangladesh is the 32nd largest economy in the world? How many people appreciate that the Prime Minister of Bangladesh is female, the leader of the opposition is female, the Speaker of the Parliament is female? This is an outstanding feat because Bangladesh is a Muslim country. Many Muslim countries, the women even don't have the voting rights. And in spite of the fact that Bangladesh is a Muslim country, the top 3 political positions are being held by women. Now, you talk about resilience to climate change. Bangladesh is a model. You talk about access to sanitation. We have done far better than many of our neighbors who are almost developed countries like India. You take it, whatever sector, Bangladesh has been doing excellent. But whenever you go abroad, you hear these negative stories. Like Professor Ganguly said, the identity. We have grown in Bangladesh. We have never suffered from this crisis, the lack of identity. Our identity is very clear. It's underpinned by secularism and Bangla language. There is no other identity we have. But in abroad, you hear these narratives. Islam is overtaking our identity. That's again our image. The question to Professor Habib, how do we break this negative cycle?
Okay, I have to do a little bit of time management because we are expected to close at 4:30. I would certainly give Professor Habib the floor. Deepinder still has one more question. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question? Then I would, hang on. Habib, do you want to come in here? Because you have got already quite a few questions.
After the question.
Or would you still like to take a couple more questions? Then Dr. Randhawa, and you will be the last questioner. Okay. Do you also have one? Okay, then in that order. So Dr. Deepinder Singh, will someone give him a microphone?
Just a very quick clarification, Professor Habib. I mean, I'm just asking to put your hat out as a sociologist, as a theoretical sociologist. The theme again is changing images and imaginaries, and as you suggested earlier, in the 80s the narrative was very different. I mean, nations got defined rather than electing to define themselves, as the case today. I'm just asking you, how has the narrative, the story changed over the last 15 years with the diffusion of communication channels and so on and so forth? For instance, I mean, if you're looking at Korea, the older generation of Japan would be thinking of the unresolved issues of comfort women. But today, for the younger generation, K-pop straddles and breaks through a lot of barriers and defines it in a much more tangible manner. And there's a whole slew of other examples that come to mind where things have metamorphosed over the years.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, over there, then it comes to you.
First of all, I would like to thank Professor Habib. I just wanted to ask so many things, but I would wrap up quickly. If we look at Bangladesh and its surrounding countries, and in Bangladesh, Islamization process went quite further, and its Buddhist neighbors and other attached neighbors. So how do you think that it influences our Islamization? Because this fundamentalism live in quite equilibrium. So how it threats our Islamization, that's the point. And I don't mean this phrase is gonna uttered by me is relevant to Bangladesh, but I want your answer. Considering these indicators, how well we do in near future. I mean, images are always changing, but images having differences with the reality. So if we look at the not only enrollment, rather level of competency attained in the education level, or the extractive financial institute attached with the political extractive institutes, biased legal system, lack of much women presence in the marketplace, though they are highly proportionate in the parliament, and how good it would be rely on the declining labor market remittance flow for the balance of payment for quite a long time. That's what we're doing. And a few other things. I mean, what's your suggestion on what points and indicators and trends we must emphasize on to minimize the gap between the reality we live in and the images we want to live up to? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Last question.
Anil Changaroth, I'm a lawyer in practice in Singapore. The perception from the world is really quite bad, right? And in what you showed us about the changing images are quite incredible. So the question I have is considering the statistics that many of these participants here highlighted, what can be done about using the changing images, right, to showcase what Bangladesh is capable of? I mean, some of the statistics people said are absolutely impressive, but the world doesn't seem to know that. So, you know, just from the couple of shots that you showed, it's really quite impressive. But I think, you know, enough said about what the past is and what the statistics are. It's about how do you, you know, Bangladesh Inc., for example, you know, there was a point in time where Singapore said this Singapore Inc. and we were canvassing Singapore and everything that we are capable of doing. So what can Bangladesh do about using the images to take it?
Well, thanks very much for that last question. This is exactly the kind of question that think tanks have to grapple with. It goes back to President Truman. You know, he asked for a one-handed economist. So why a one-handed economist? He says most people I have would say, on the one hand you could do this, on the other hand you could do that. Just tell me what to do. So Habib, tell us what to do.
No, I think these are excellent and sort of heartwarming comments on Bangladesh, much better than I have done. But the key question is a very serious question, that what can be done to change the mindset of the world? And there I give a lot of, responsibility to our government, especially to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, And this is time for public diplomacy. This is time for soft power, that Bangladesh should project itself internationally. And we can do that. I think there's an inner contradiction, because back home, we really need to be very clear. I think these are very important questions, that what we are. Maybe for some of us sitting here, there is no problem, but as a nation, we still have a problem. We need to resolve that. And I keep reminding my friends in Bangladesh that there's nothing wrong in identifying Islam as a source of inspiration. And I keep telling them, but the Islam you should look at is not the Islam of the Wahhabis, but the Islam of the scholars of Islam, Islam of Ibn Khaldun. You need to look at Islam of Farabi, Farazi, and all the leading lights of Islam in the 11th century that you should read, and then you should be proud. But our immediate identity, as I project myself, is that we are Bengali. We speak Bengali, we think Bengali, and if we become identified as Bengalis, we have more mileage to gain, and that's for a very pragmatic reason. Then we can count Rabindranath Tagore, we can count Amartya Sen, we can count all the illuminaries from the Bengali-speaking zones of India as our brothers, rather than separating ourselves from our own brothers on some other identity, namely religious identity. So we really need to resolve this question. But some of the points are very, very well taken. I was not aware of this 23% Android apps made in Bangladesh. I think this is a remarkable story. And Apple's app. And I was reading, in preparation of this paper, I was reading Nilekhani's book on reimagining India. And he recounts his own experience that when he started, when Infosys started, he said a small group of, IT professionals, tall, lanky, bespectacled, going around, and people are not taking them seriously. You want to sell us software, you want to solve our problems, IT problems. They were not taken seriously. And now look at where Infosys is now today. And this is his own life story. I mean, he has been through this. And he has worked with the government, he has worked in the private sector. And when I read that, and I think this is exactly where Bangladesh is today. So they're not being taken seriously, but once we keep achieving, these feathers on our crown, and then people cannot just ignore you. Now, coming back to the issue of remittance, this is a very important question. Now, Bangladesh has been a beneficiary not only of financial remittance, it has also been a beneficiary of social remittance. And I say that, very clearly, because the social remittance would also include expatriate Bangladeshis who have returned, who had an option of staying overseas. People like Mr. Abid, he was based in London. He returned to Bangladesh and started his project in the rural development under the rubric of BRAC. And then I think of several other individuals who really made a difference in Bangladesh, whether in terms of writing the Constitution of Bangladesh, Dr. Kamal Hussain. He could have lived anywhere in the world, and this was a remark made by law professors in NUS many years ago, that why does he live in Bangladesh? I said, because that's his home, because he's an internationally celebrated lawyer, he could have made fortunes if he relocated himself in some other destination. Probably he did. This is someone, and we have these resources, and every time I go to, I've met like top-notch Indian policy analysts, Professor, Mr. Jha, he was an aide to Indira Gandhi, and he was asking me, how is Rahman, and I said, which Rahman? Rahman Sovan, and how is Kamal, So these are people who are on first-name basis with the leading policymakers in other countries. Selig Harrison, I remember many years ago, I met him. Selig Harrison was a top-notch journalist and Carnegie Endowment scholar, asking me, how is Kamal, how is Hamida? These are his friends, So we have those resources in Bangladesh. So one of the problems that we have, that sometimes we don't use our own resources adequately. We don't mine them completely. the allocation is misguided. People who get some important positions are not qualified enough, and some very qualified people are not chosen to represent the country. We have that problem, I'm not denying that. So we really need to do a need assessment. We need to sit down and sort out what the problems are and how we can resolve it, how we can overcome, sort of tough battles that go on in Bangladesh as to who has done more. Once we have resolved that, then we need an active and robust public diplomacy to project ourselves internationally, to move beyond our regions and our boundaries, and to see what's going on and how we can position ourselves internationally. So we have a long way to go. I mean, I don't think the bright future is just waiting to embrace us. We really need to do hard work. And there, we need to look at Singapore, that what Singapore has done over the last 30 years, 40 years. When I was here many years ago, the role model of Singapore was Switzerland. The founding leader, Lee Kuan Yew, said that we want to be the Switzerland, and now Singapore's per capita income is higher than Swiss per capita income, So you need to model after some very, very, successful nations, but then you need to beat them in the long run. So Bangladesh has a long way to go, but social remittance is something that I'm quite optimistic about. And one of the recent trends in Bangladesh is that a large number of Bangladeshi women are going overseas to work. And I have interviewed some of them in Abu Dhabi, and they're sending money to Bangladesh to ensure that their children get education. So they say, we don't want our children to come here and work like us. We want our children to be like you. And I was amazed. I did field work in Bangladesh. I asked a rural woman, what do you want your daughter to be? She is spending all her money in her daughter's education. She said, I want my daughter to be a medical doctor. This was a revolutionary change in aspiration. In the old days, they would say, I want my daughter to be a clerk in the government office. Now she's saying, I want my daughter to be a medical doctor. So the expectations have no limits now, and the aspirations have no limits now. So I think this is an aspect of social remittance that is playing a very positive role in Bangladesh. But of course, there are dangers ahead. It depends on which way we go. Do we fall prey to the propaganda that, I've seen some propagandist articles written by people here in Singapore that Muslims in Bangladesh have become a minority. I said, what, and international journals publish that, because that's the kind of sentiment they want to hear. But those are pure and simple propaganda, and we need to overcome that by resilience and by developing a robust bureaucracy. We have overcome this negative epithet of international basket case. In 2010, Wall Street Journal published an article saying no more basket case. And I think that's the end of it, 2010. In the last 15 years, or in the last 7 years, we have done remarkable progress, we have made progress. And I just give you 2 examples. There is an institution, I didn't know about it, maybe Dr. Ganguly would know, International Parliamentary Union. Now this has been in existence since 1889. And the president of International Parliamentary Union, and I'm very proud to call him a friend, Mr. Sabet Chaudhry, he told me that this is the oldest institution of global democracy, International Parliamentary Union. He's the president of that. Now there's a Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. This is an association of Commonwealth speakers. The head of that institution is a Bangladeshi woman. She is the Speaker of Bangladeshi Parliament, Dr. Shirin Sharmin Chaudhry. So we have made inroads in international institutions already. We are there. My good old friend Selim Jahan is an economist. He's the lead writer of UNDP report. And he has created an app. Now we can all download UNDP report on our iPhone. So we are actually making inroads in institutions, and as you pointed out very correctly, that we see an important change in the quality of people that are becoming migrants now. Etihad, Emirates Airlines, a number of international airlines now have Bangladeshi pilots, Bangladeshi engineers, and you see Bangladeshi doctors and engineers all over the Gulf. So these are the new trends, and I think these trends will continue in the near future to uplift Bangladesh from the lower middle to middle income group. And thank you very much for being here and take part in this conversation. Thank you.
Well, it has been a very important conversation because the issue for a think tank specializing on South Asia is to project to the world outside of South Asia as to what is South Asia about, whom are we connecting to. Whether you like it or not, some images remain fixed and static in time. The basket case is one of them. Never mind Wall Street Journal or whatever, the Western public opinion still likes to believe what it likes to believe. So that is the duality of the image and the imaginaire. And that problem is there, and as the colleague from the High Commission pointed out, well, there is work to be done, not only by diplomats, but also by academics. And one of the best ways of doing that work, dear Habib, is for you to send me this presentation, reworked, as an ISAS working paper. We will certainly happily give you the notes that have been taken of this conversation, and that would be a long-term contribution. Allow me to say a couple of things more. I am not a one-handed economist at all. I am a two-handed political scientist. That's why I pick up what my colleague and very dear friend, Professor Sumit Ganguly, pointed out. The bifocal lenses in terms of which many believe Bangladesh looks at Bangladesh. That on certain days of the week you are Islam, certain days of the week you are Bangla. The point is, long ago, when Lord Curzon divided Bengal into East Bengal and West Bengal, I mean, that division itself was based on Islam. So there is no need to hide the fact that Bangladeshi society is an Islamic society, and Bangladeshi state is not an Islamic state. So the bifocal lenses have a bifocal state-society relationship. The issue then is, how is the mediation done, and can the adversaries negotiate in terms of norms for the creation of which they collaborate? If a society can get there, then it would be resilient. Or in other words, there will be no democracy if there is no party competition, and there will be no party competition if there is no party collaboration in the making of the rules in terms of which they compete. Otherwise, it would be either war or a one-party dictatorship. So in terms of that, we have to ask what is going to happen in 2019. That would be a test case. If we have another election, which is a real election with a real outcome, and then still somebody talks about the basket case, well, I suppose you should put them in the waste paper basket. I mean, that's the kind of challenge that we as academics and members of a think tank should think about. Now, a final word. I'll tell you where I had my Rwanda moment. I had my Rwanda moment when I went to BRAC. I went to BRAC fully expecting to see an NGO. No, I didn't see an NGO. I was taken to the 17th floor and treated exactly the way I would have been treated in a major corporation in the world. The NGO culture and corporate culture have met together in the culture of the textile industry. We had a colleague who was doing a PhD with one of my friends on the textile industry, and he said, look, India had a head start. I mean, India had Mumbai, Bombay, India had any number of textile mills. Where are they now? Where are we? Where is the difference? He says, Indian textile mills first have to handle their textile unions. If I want my workers to work beyond 5 o'clock, that will not be an issue at all. And our ladies who work here have these mobile phones, their monies go directly into their families. And that's the kind of culture they have created. I was struck by, I wrote it down for myself, the novelty of Bangladesh. I am a Bengali, but not from the wrong Upar Bangla. What I found in Bangladesh was the freshness of a young nation, which is the only South Asian nation to have fought for its independence with its own blood. Everyone else had independence handed over, which is why, after becoming independent, they didn't hand it back to their civil servants, to their political parties, or to their armies. They kept their weapons. And that is what explains the prowess of the NGOs in Bangladesh. I was giving a talk on public service delivery, the point was made, and showing what happens in India, because I was talking about India. And I was showing two pictures from my state, Odisha. One was about a hospital, and the other was about a missile test station, which had just tested Agni 5 or 4. And the other one was a hospital where a doctor is operating on a woman who has given birth. Because birth control operations on women can be done only after birth, and for that, you need a machine, a French machine called souffleur, and that souffleur sort of expands the abdomen and the operation can be done. In this hospital, there was a machine like that, which was waiting for the minister to come and inaugurate it. But in the meantime, the relatives of the women who were lining up for operation were getting anxious and offering to beat up the doctor if he didn't operate. So what the doctor had done is to devise a way where an orderly could pump with a bicycle pump the woman's abdomen. I have the pictures, got from the local newspaper, and the operation was being made. So I showed those pictures and I asked what would happen if this had happened in Bangladesh, to which the answer I got in Kumilla. Well, we will go inaugurate the machine and get the doctor to use it or beat him up. That is how I found Bangladeshi democracy at the local level, not mediated by political parties, but it is there. Or Bangladeshi creativity, or for that matter, the joy of coming back home and working from home and having world-class facilities and home as a bonus. That is what Bangladesh, and there was a time at the height of India's independent struggle that what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. Today I would say what Bangladesh thinks today, I hope South Asia will think tomorrow. Now this is the message. I came back as a Bengali from Bangladesh, and I would like to thank you, Habib, for having come, having become our guest at ISAS, and for this lecture. And I would like to give you something which I have written, not about India today, but about Kautilya. One of the best experts of Kautilya is in Bangladesh actually. It's called Classical Roots of Modern India. Those roots are there. It's up to us to discover them and do something about them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I would now invite you all to have a cup of tea and continue the conversation.